everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a fish biologist, an ichthyologist and a PhD student. I specialise and study the evolution of Loricariids catfishes, which are also known as plecos or L-numbers or whiptails within the aquarium hobby. And I've also got experience within the aquarium trade and in the hobby, obviously, because I've got aquariums. So today I'm going to be talking about two different aquarium diets from the same brand, but they're somewhat related and definitely related to Loricariids. So this is by the brand New Life Spectrum, which isn't very common in the UK. They're reasonably common within the US. So these are pretty difficult to get or impossible to get in the UK, but it's really useful for American hobbyists to kind of know what they're using as well, even if we can't really get it easily here. And it's just trying to get good products into UK is a good thing anyway. So this is the first one, and this is the water stable wafers or pellets. They're not particularly, they're very traditional in that wafer shape, but they're a little bit thicker, so somewhat more of a pellet than a wafer in a way, but it doesn't matter because these are aimed at Loricariids or fishes that can rasp. I guess somewhat because that's a powder blue surgeon fish, which I wouldn't really take for rasping, but I guess they can. They use their mouth to break it something a little bit more solid. And this is the other one, which is the New Life Spectrum AlgaeMax wafers, and they're pretty much the same in the pellet size. So these are both diets aimed, obviously with the packaging, aimed at feeding largely algivorous fishes, but it does say herbivorous in there, which is not a term I really like because they aren't actually eating plants so much, they're eating more algae and similar organisms. So one is particularly good, this one, and one is not ideal. So generally my observations of this, I do not find fishes eat the water stable ones, and it's probably due to it's very high in fish meal, very high in cereals, those are the main ingredients. It has got algae, but it's really difficult to know how much. This one I haven't had as much of a chance to test out, but they do seem to eat it a little bit more willingly. I have noticed that they don't just totally ignore it, like this can be sitting there, they would never touch it, whereas this one they will. What would you be feeding it for? Because that really matters, and that is algivores. So anything that feeds on a large amount of algae. It could be a good addition if you've got something that feeds on some algae and maybe a few more invertebrates, things like that. It is reasonably high in krill, squid, I think, what else? I think, is there some fish in there? There's a little bit of fish, but there's also a little bit of wheat. The wheat is actually a little bit lower than a lot of diets which contain a lot more cereal crops. So it's not all that bad. It's just the problem is the algae content it's very diverse of the selection of algae, but the volumes might not be ideal. This one contains very low comparison amount of algae, but a reasonable diversity compared to a lot of diets. It's still got that cereals, quite a lot of cereals because it lists as cereals and then alfalfa. But this diet I would really like, so AlgaeMax I'd really like to see in the UK. It probably, I wouldn't recommend it entirely over Apache Stone Green because you can't up the algae content, you're stuck with what you've got. But it could be a good addition, or if you can't get Rapash in your country, so like Australia, if you can get this, it would be fine. The other thing is some might be a little bit more fussy. There's certain diets, they just, even if it's healthy, they might not touch. And I think you could feed quite a wide range of fishes on this, maybe even tropheus. The problem is given its wafers, it's very much limited to fishes that can rasp or very much pick on a food. There's a very strong mouth, so I don't think tropheus as much as maybe silver dollars and those more herbivorous like Metatinus, caracins. Hence why also Loricariids, Synodontis, anything with a really large mouth. They will probably soften up a lot quicker in the water, or you could even leave it in a jar till it's the desired sort of softness for other fishes to break down on it. So I'm going to go over the ingredients in a bit, and hopefully that will enlighten people. And I would like to see this one in the UK. This is the only one we can get in the UK, the water soluble, and that is not really any use for any fishes, just because it's well, I'll explain in a bit. So I'll explain the ingredients. Here, both from New Life Spectrum, you can see this is the water stable, which has quite different packaging in a way to the AlgaeMax wafers. I believe this was the predecessor to this one. It's got the same fishes actually in the packaging, which I think is kind of interesting. So we got this, I believe it's a powder blue tang, and also a Hypancistrus, I'd say some sort of L66, L333. And then, which is not the most obvious to see, these are Pseudotropheus, I think, Demisoni. So a Mabuna Vifeli Malawi cichlid. So both are marketed very much at this algivore based diet. This one even says AlgaeMax in it. It says herbivore diet, tropical fish, natural algae enhanced with water stable wafers. So water stable is something you might see a little bit, and that just means that it's not really going to expand a lot when it goes into water. Some foods really do, and whether that causes issues in fishes is really difficult to say. Here, this is just the water stable wafers, so it does seem that this is the predecessor anyway. They are about the same size as well. So if I open both up, this one rarely gets used, so, and then if I put the little wafers sort of, just so I don't have to move the camera, there, and if I open this one up and put the wafers here, there's only a slight sort of difference between them. But you can see these ones are usually a bit more chunky compared to the, and if I move the camera out, that might be easier. Yeah, so you can see here they're slightly different in the actual consistency. If I pop it back, pop this back. So this one I've only just got anyway, so. The volume actually is slightly higher in the, so net weight is actually slightly higher here than here. So I don't know whether, there could be quite a few things behind that. It's not really a big difference. But if you're paying more for one and say the ingredients were the same, if you're paying more for this one, or say they're the same price, you'd probably rather go for that. It's simple sort of shopping. But you can see it's very much advertised for algivores, herbivores. Hypancistrus, a lot of people will say are carnivores. If you read the scientific literature, they are not. They're largely feeding on algae, detritus, maybe a few invertebrates, but still it's a big jump to say they're just omnivores. Otherwise almost everything's an omnivore. So what I'm going to go through first is the one that I'd recommend for anyone feeding algivorous fish, which is actually AlgaeMax. As the name suggests, it is the most algivorous version. Ignore that, that's fireworks. It's Diwali and I guess bonfire night as well. So this one, no soybean additives. So soya is, they're specifically saying soybean, so they're not, I don't know whether that could include other bits of soya. Generally soya is not ideal, I think, in fish foods. It's very difficult to digest, and this really contrasts from a lot of the high cereal foods. And aquatic veggies. So vegetables to me would be macrophytic plants, so your traditional, say, courgette, sweet corn, broccoli, stuff like that, peas, beans, things like that would be vegetables to me. I understand that in some countries that veggies is kind of a really different term, along with herbs or herbs if you're American. So but then in this context it's largely referring to algae, which I don't like to call them vegetables, because then people think they can add vegetables, and it covers algivores. They're very different nutritionally, they're very vastly distantly related in some cases. Algae is just a term for photosynthetic smaller things, I guess, but then you've got like macroalgae like kelp and seaweeds. And then we always get this sort of statement, oh, maintain colour and vitality. Algae very good for colour, particularly, and for both marine and freshwater. So marine and freshwater actually do have slightly different nutritional requirements. Marine, there's something, I can't remember what they need, that freshwater fish can produce anyway. But this diet is very much marketed at algivores, and this is the one diet that will compete with Apache Southern Green on their algae. So if I move it a bit closer, and we go here, so it contains, so with all fish foods, with all foods in general, the rule is, and I think it's law in some countries, that the first ingredient's always the highest. Unless they list the volumes, it can be a little bit difficult to understand how high. So I've seen with other foods where that first ingredient might be 20%. And it could even be lower, I guess. But the first ingredient is algae. So this is a little bit maybe misleading, and you're not going to notice these... I hate grammar. But these two dots, not semicolon. Is it no? Maybe it is colon, but that's algae in general. So that first ingredient is algae. Usually you'll see it in brackets when it's containing. It's like one ultra category, and then it will subdivide it. So that first ingredient is algae, and that algae is made of Corellia, which is quite common. I don't know if it's a traditional seaweed or not. Usually you find in like powdered form, but you can powder down seaweed. Ulva, that's definitely a traditional seaweed. Then we've got red seaweed. Red seaweed could be anything. We've got kelp. And then we've got spirulina. We've got wakame. That's definitely a traditional seaweed. Regarding spirulina, and I believe Corellia, both of these are definitely, spirulina is a cyanobacteria, which I count as actually an algae. And people say, oh, it's not. It doesn't really matter. But Loricariids, algivorous fish do feed on cyanobacteria anyway. So regardless, they do feed on cyanos. Just maybe not the ones in the aquarium. Like, it's not to say the ones that are pests in the aquarium are bad. It's just that that they just won't touch it if they're less likely to eat it, and they don't seem particularly a fan of eating spirulina either, hence why it's better to have other algae as well. I find wakame, they're not as confident with eating either, so it's good to have it as a mixture and kind of like mask it, a bit like I guess you do toddlers. And then so I don't know whether the algae... Oh yeah, okay, it's got a full stop there. So this is kind of just a mixture of algae, but it's a wide diversity of different algae, so different aspects of nutrition from algae, which I think is great, but it'd be nice to know volumes, personally. So I guess it's kind of a big mixture that they got. But this is really great for algivores, whether it be a lot of Loricariids, whether it be Tropheus, whether it be... fishes like that, even discus. So this is a great ingredient list already. The only issue is we don't know volumes. So this could be actually comprisingly somewhat low, but it's really difficult to know. I'd have to actually email the company. We've got whole Antarctic krill. So this is where it gets a little bit more omnivorous, and more towards the carnivorous side with those ingredients. So they will feed on invertebrates in the wild. These are very different taxa, but then you could argue these algae aren't closely related to the ones they feed on the wild. Algae, all of the groups are diverse and can be quite distantly related. But we've got krill and we've got squid. I guess maybe it might up that protein content, but it's really difficult to say. Giant squid is a strange one. Like, so they're not using normal squid, and this is where I kind of think like fishing practices maybe. I don't know why it has giant squid of all the squids. Like usually I think the ones that generally get caught are the same sort of species that you're getting in your supermarket. I'm not sure which it is. I've got an example here. Oh my god. Let me pause the camera and... So this is the species of squid that you're going to find in the supermarket. This one at the back. This is preserved. I brought them frozen, and this is I think it's one of the, I can't remember which species of octopus. I do know, but I don't write down anything. But these are both the common species that you're largely going to find in the supermarkets for food. I believe this octopus isn't the most ideal for food, but this is the sort of one that you're going to find in, I guess, a lot of squid mills. Maybe it just depends where they're catching it. I left him too long in formalin, hence his eye looks terrible. But I guess on the other side you might be able to see it. It's just not as clear as the octopus. Anyway, back to fish foods anyway. So that's why I find it a bit strange why it's giant squid specifically. I guess they do bring up quite a bit. Anyway, getting on to some of the other ingredients. You've got whole wheat, flour. I don't know what... So wheat, that's just another cereal crop. This sort of section doesn't make it so ideal for algivores or detritivores. Small amounts are okay, but it does seem quite high up on the ingredient list. When you're considering algae, this algae might just be all one. So it's not like, say, 10% Corellia, then 15%, and then sort of making these two seem like smaller... small amounts added to the ingredient list anyway. So wheat flour, not ideal. I'm not sure what that is, to be honest. Could it be actually cotton, like the plant, like the waste material? Anyway, then we got some seaweed, which is great for algivores. Then we've got Chondrus crispus, which is actually known as Irish moss, and I wonder whether they didn't use the common name. Also, it's carrageenan, which is a gelling agent. This is an algae, but Irish moss kind of make people think, why are you adding moss? Firstly, mosses are also kind of in the group known as bryophytes, not to be confused with bryozoa. I think that means like moss plants. Or photosynthetic moss, because bryozoa means moss animals, I believe. This is a little bit of a difficult one. It is a really good gelling agent, and you don't need much of it. But the aspect is it has small maybe issues of human health. I don't think as much with fishes. Then we got more fish. We got fish oil. So I'm not actually going to be too critical on some of these ingredients, but then the issue is that with a dry diet you can't add extra ingredients in. You have to kind of add other sources of food. So I can't add extra algae into this diet because it's not going to stick. It's just going to float around in the water column, whereas a gel diet I can, or even any sort of similar pastes or things like that I can add extra ingredients to. This I can't, so I'm largely stuck with what's there. Garlic is good, and most diets have it. Large quantities maybe not so much, but it's not going to be in large quantities. Some of these ingredients are quite expensive as like their pure state, like this. If it's not just carrageen, then it can be quite expensive. That's why I never bought any. I only bought carrageen. Garlic, ginger, most of these, a lot of, I think, foods like that is because they're very, for humans, we know the benefits in humans to have small amounts, so therefore people are more likely to buy it for their fishes. We've got, this is a compound, xanthellus, which is a red enhancer. It comes from algaes. It's fine. Marigold. What else can I say? There's quite a few. Clay, I don't know if that's part of like forming the actual thing. That's going to go in one way, out the other. Sea salt, I don't know why. And then we've got all of these supplements almost going down. And just because this is a long ingredient list, it doesn't mean it's any better than a short ingredient list, and vice versa. There's a lot more to it about what ingredients are actually there. I'm not sure what it really means by the preservative comment here. I assume that's so they can add ingredients like that, the squid, the fish, and it not actually break down in a dry diet. Because if you were just going to add that, it probably wouldn't last long in a pot like that. It's going to be opened and exposed to air. Preservatives aren't always bad, and they do have a purpose. If you had dried fish and you're constantly exposing it to air, it probably won't last long. It will either go sodden, like, you know, biscuits where they get a bit soggy and that sort of stale, and rather than things that will go a bit more like dry out with time, like bread. Depends on the environment as well. If you're in a very humid environment, it's not going to be ideal. Hence why you need these preservatives. And no hormone additives. I'm not sure that it is actually legal to add hormones in the UK to fish foods or any animal feed. Without sort of like supervision, because obviously they do use it for certain farming, if you're wanting them to breed at a certain time. We've got this is kind of useful. You want them to sink. Some foods you buy and you think they're going to sink and they don't. What else do we have? So protein content, I don't really care about those, because we know it's more useful, I think, to know about the sources of protein, because that's what makes it accessible, whether it's got the precise nutrition that those fishes are adapted to feeding on, and whether they're going to have the gut biota, the biology, to be able to break those down and extract what they want from it. And that's not just protein, that's also what they haven't included, is they haven't actually mentioned values for ash, or why can I never remember the name? Mineral content. So ash means mineral content. They probably not included it because people get very triggered by the term ash. They think they're adding ash. No, that's the mineral content. But that's kind of useful to know, because the source of those minerals affects how it is taken up and whether it can be taken up as readily as others. So that's particularly like phosphorus, magnesium, I guess. But then I guess they might be burnt off, so it's really difficult. Because phosphorus definitely would, but I guess calcium and stuff isn't going to dry out so easily. I don't know. Fat, fibre, I just don't really think these are as valuable as the ingredient list. A lot of these, so these are sort of the levels of certain vitamins. The desired amount are often based on fisheries and aquaculture. They do not reflect, we do not know the required nutrient or vitamin content that a lot of fishes we keep need. So, and then you could say, oh, but if we add a lot, that's better. It's really difficult to say, because you can overdose on certain vitamins. Vitamin D I always find interesting, because some fish do benefit from UVB. But then if you've got the really bent thick ones that live in the dark, maybe less so. But a lot of these, it's just difficult to say, because we don't really know. We know what they eat in the wild. A lot of fishes eat in the wild, or we can make assumptions. We don't know this, so we don't know what volumes are required. Protein we can kind of guess sometimes, but it will depend on the fish's age. So I'd focus more on what this is, because it will tell you the source, how close it is to the wild diet. But there's any strange ingredients, like there's a lot of here. Most of these are just trying to get vitamins and minerals. So we've got thiamine, which is great. Well, it's vitamin B1. It's used for neurons and growth. Thiaminase breaks it down. We've got vitamin D. B12. Some fishes, I believe, can make their own. Not all can. We don't know which can and which can't to some extent because there's so many different fishes. And then, so we've got feeding instructions. This is just, I guess, to cover themselves up. But the other thing is move leftovers after 6 hours. Firstly, it's easier to feed these in the dark, as it says. It's designed to feed fishes, nocturnal fishes. Who feeds us, like, who only sleeps for 6 hours? Or like, so this is like, after 6 hours you have to come back or wake up and remove it. Some of these fishes take a long time to feed, so I'm not that fast. But then some have really bad instructions saying remove after 20 minutes. Anyway, so I'll go over the next one very quickly because there's not much to say on this. So this is new Life Spectrum's water stable, so the predecessor, as I mentioned, without soya. If it's got other cereals, I don't think it really makes a difference if you got it. High nutrient density for less waste. Less waste only works if they can digest it. So if they can't digest it, what's the point of having less, saying it's nutrient dense for less waste? Because they're not digesting it, it's going in one way, out the other. For full colour, it doesn't mean it's always the healthiest ingredients. And then again, great for grazing species, which is vague. Most fish have some level, I guess, of grazing. But strikingly, if you look at this ingredient list, it's not even half, and it's in a larger font. It's not even, if I have to move this really close. Whole fish, this is not for algivores. Cereals, is that traditional? It's always fish, cereals and a vegetable. This lot isn't bad though. This is actually quite good. Apart from that, this is not for algivores. This is not for piscivores. This could be for, I guess, some omnivores, but we don't know how much whole fish is in it. We don't know how many cereals are in it. The cereals aren't going to be much use for, I think, for many fish. If you're feeding carp, trout, what most of the studies are on, and what most of these diets are designed for, then maybe. But whole fish, please don't feed this to any sensitive algivores, like some of the Ancistrus relatives. Quite a lot of Ancistrus, Baryancistrus. I wouldn't really want to feed it to Tropheus too much. I wouldn't really even want to feed it to Discus if avoidable. Not that they'd probably touch it, but which fish don't touch this. And then it's really vague. So what fruit is there? What do they mean by fruit entirely? And what do they mean by vegetables? Could be anything. That's just like saying plants. And we got alfalfa, which is pretty used to saying you're not including cereals, but you got bloody alfalfa in there, which is not going to be digested. That's basically more cereals. What cereals are even using? I assume wheat. But yeah, so you got this sort of, I guess, because the problem is that fishes are going to be feeding on algae, aren't going to be feeding on fish often. Like the ones that are feeding on algae might feed very few on fish, but those feeding on fish aren't often going to be touching algae much. So it seems kind of like the wrong way round to be doing it. It's a very strange ingredient list. It's not the worst, but it's very odd. I do like, so this is where the colour enhancer is coming from, the algae. But you can see it's very different. The only thing is we don't know how much algae is in here. We don't know how much of any ingredients in any of these. It could be really distributed, so the actual amount of algae isn't much. And you can't change it because you can't add anything to it. And again, we have this complete food. Complete is kind of, I guess, somewhat a legal term. So yes, it's complete if you're basing it on the studies on carp, on trout, on channel catfish ictalurus. If you're basing it on those sort of things, but it's really vague. And then we've got all these additives, which are fine, but if you compare, so the ingredient list kind of stops about, I'm going to say about here, before it becomes all of these nutritional additives here, it's about the same, it's just a larger font. All of these are useful. I just find it a bit strange, some of the formatting. And then obviously we've got these colorants. What does it mean by colorants? So is that the colour enhancer and not the algae? So how many algae have you actually got in it if it's not, you're adding an extra? But maybe that's like a summary. It's weird. And then if I quickly... So it's definitely not for algivores. For piscivores, I don't know. They're not... You could add it to diet. We got less protein. Probably because of all of those cereals, just saying. Moisture 10%, moisture, everything's going to moisture. Ash, well, at least we know how much ash it's got. But this obviously triggers a lot of people because they think it's actual ash. Then we've got fat contents, it's fine, crude fibre. So that's kind of it. These are very different diets for kind of different fishes. I would use this, and I haven't used it. Is it even in date? Oh, it goes out of date soon, so it shows how much I've used, and I've only got this recently. So, there. Not for human consumption. They've got to say that because, you know. So, very different diets, aimed at the same fish by the same brand. This brand's quite good at having, I guess, a diversity of diets. But then I guess half of it is more whether it's algae or not. This, I'm not sure even say what you'd feed it to, but you could feed it, I guess, carp and things like that who are much more generalist. So anyway, I end this video here because it's going to be a very long one, but it's going to be a little bit more positive than previous ones I've done. Anyway, thank you for watching.